Bizarre Brain Comics. Hello, and welcome to Bizarre Brain Comics. I am Gary, your host, and today I want to talk a little bit about some classic pre-code science fiction from EC Comics. I'm just going to cover one story, and of course EC is well known for their outstanding horror comics, crime comics, and of course science fiction. And this book we're going to look at, I'm probably going to be showing you some stuff from this book again. But we're just going to focus on one story. This is EC Classics number 12 from 1989, reprinting some EC Classic science fiction from 1953. Weird Science. This time they had Weird Science and Weird Fantasy, and then they were combined into Weird Science Fantasy and went down to just the one title. And it really didn't matter because it all covered the same kind of stuff. What did matter is that there wasn't as much. But this title was basically a sustainer. The science fiction stuff was basically a sustainer. And we should all be glad that EC did sustain it, because then we wouldn't have all this wonderful stuff. And that to be reprinted ad nauseum over the decades, just because it was so good. Okay, and this cover goes to the story of 50 Girls 50, which we're not going to talk about this time. And the cover is drawn by Wally Wood. Oh, great Wood. Look how complex it is. All the gorgeous female figures he had to draw for this particular cover. And some great composition, great draftsmanship, and of course, and Wally Wood, of course, he was good at great science fiction, admirable in horror. Didn't do as much of the horror stuff, and really wonderful in his humor stuff too, which we saw in Mad. And then on into the action adventure and superhero stuff, because he was one of the early biggies at Marvel on Daredevil primarily, and then doing some other stuff there at Marvel. And he was instrumental in alternative comics publishing, starting in the 60s, stuff that really didn't pick up much until the 80s. And the story that we're going to look at was drawn by Joe Orlando. Again, he was one of the excellent creators at EC in the 50s, and went on to do some admirable work as artist, writer, and primarily editor in later decades. For the longest time, he was the primary editor for DC's horror comics, their House of Mystery, House of Shadows, and that the other stuff. And he really brought a lot of the EC flavor to those horror comics. And he was an excellent draftsman and storyteller. Just not as popular as someone like Wally Wood or Al Williamson. But he was good both in the horror and the science fiction genres. And I don't know who wrote the story, because they don't give the credits, but it may have been probably either Al Feldstein or Bill Gaines. And I'm betting, just because of this subject matter, it was probably Bill Gaines. And Bill Gaines was the publisher, editor-in-chief, and one of the writers for the EC Comics. Bill Gaines, he was born in 1922 to 1992. And he, of course, is an American publisher and co-editor of EC Comics. His father was Max Gaines, publisher of All American Comics, and was himself an influential figure in the comics history. He helped, actually, with getting Superman and later Wonder Woman published. And then, of course, created EC Comics, which was originally educational comics and later became entertaining comics after his death under his son. In World War II, Bill Gaines was rejected by the Army and the Coast Guard, and went to his draft board and volunteered. And that got him into the Army Air Corps. And he trained as a photographer at Lowry Field here in Denver. Then to Oklahoma, where they had no photography facility, so he was on permanent KP, kitchen patrol. In 1946, he was back home to complete his chemistry degree, and he intended to be a chemistry teacher. In 1947, his father was killed in an unfortunate boating accident on Lake Placid. You might remember Lake Placid, the Winter Olympics, 1980, and had that horror movie, Lake Placid, with the giant crocodile and Betty White. And he was forced to take over the family business, publishing EC Comics, educational comics. He didn't like what his father had been publishing, educational, religious stuff, etc. And he experimented with other subject matter, following the newest craze. And he started having some success with the crime genre. Then he hit on crime and later the horror genre. And that's when it took off. Okay, and these two genres did very well. With the Crypt Keeper and all those other horror hosts. He also liked science fiction, which didn't sell as well, but he continued to publishing it because he loved it so much, which is what I meant by a sustainer. Even though sales didn't necessarily warrant continue publishing these titles, they did, just because he wanted it. All these books are later known for the fantastic art and writing. EC also was premier with the humor parody genre with Mad, with the Frederick Wortham book Seduction of the Innocent, which I think plays a part in this the story we're going to look at. It prompted the Senate hearings on juvenile delinquency. And the comic book industry created the Comics Code Authority, which basically killed EC Comics. They just virtually made it illegal for every title. Anything with weird, horror, creepy, fear, all those titles could no longer be used. And he tried a few, some other genres, into the war and adventure, stuff like that, which they had already been having some success with, and eventually just got rid of it. But they weren't as successful. But it basically killed all EC Comics except for Mad, which he kept, and then that became a black and white magazine, so he could get around the Comics Code, and which he could have done with the horror as well. He should have. And in 1955, he did that, and it did incredibly well for decades. And Bill Gaines sold Mad Magazine in 1961 to Premier Industries, but remained publisher until his death in 1892. That was Bill Gaines. An extremely influential figure in comics history. Now let's take a little look inside here. Okay, and here is the story we're going to look at. The Reformers, drawn by Joe Orlando. Okay? Whoops. And here, it's a ship, and they call themselves landing on this planet. And they call themselves the Reformers, and they go around basically being the morality police. And apparently forcibly, wherever they come to these planets and these inhabited planets, and the people if they have problems with crime and what the Reformers consider immorality, they do stuff about it. And they mention how they had just a couple planets before this had landed on Earth, where they were. He says, "Oh, it's just like the other planets we've been to, just like the last one, and the one before that, the one called Earth, and probably just as evil, just as self-indulging. Well, report in that we've landed, and give the planet's position, etc., etc." And headquarters contacts them and said they're Team 7, and they've landed, and gives the spatial coordinates for this planet. And then here we see a vehicle, someone coming to greet them. And notice they've got these kind of halo things over their head. And they land here, and here comes this person to greet them. And this figure, I mean, in the way he's dressed, it looks like it could have been drawn by Wally Wood almost. Said, "Who are you, and why do you come here?" Said, "We have come to examine your civilization, to help you reorganize it and reform it, to eliminate its evils." Said, "We have nothing here. You find nothing here to reform. Our society has no evils." Said, "That's not possible. What about... So, take me to your leader, your head man." And I said, "That's not possible. He doesn't see anybody, but I can give you a tour of the place. And my name is Peter." That's a clue right there. "Very well, Peter. Take us on a tour of your planet." And so they get in his vehicle and says, "Yeah, your ship will be safe. There are no vandals. There is no crime." "No crime? Impossible." Said, everyone thing is said, "Possibly, but here we have equal distribution of basic needs." "Then everyone is forced to work? There's discontent?" Says, "No. Everyone's needs are met." And he gives them a tour, see this wonderful city. It's so clean, and they said there's leisure and no immorality, and says, here's a cafe. One eats and drinks here as much as one wants. Says, "Alcoholic beverages? Well, of course, if you want." And said, "So there's drunkenness?" And said, "No, our people don't drink to excess." Said, "But there must be chronic alcoholics." Said, "No, nothing like that." And then this very lovely, and I don't know why they say calling this scantily clad, because that's except for the slit on the side, revealing a bit of leg, that is hardly immodest and scantily clad. There's this lovely lady leads her child by as they walk by. I said, "It's an extremely promiscuous society." It says, "No, scant clothing does not mean we are immoral or promiscuous. Not in the least. If one is evil, one sees evil, even in beauty. Our moral behavior is unimpeachable." And this kind of stuff goes on. And they said, "Well, what about learning and stuff?" "Oh, temptation? Well, temptation is only for the temptable." Where there is love and beauty, there is no temptation. And then they see this library and says, "Oh, this book. It's a murder mystery." And our books are about our society, past and present. And just because, well, yes, there's literature, there's crime, murder, and in fiction, because we enjoy reading about it. But this could cause it. That could be harmful. No. If there is no desire or reasons for crime, reading about it will not cause it. There's some great arguments in here. But you have even on all forms, you got in books, magazine, and comics. Notice they mention comics in this. And of course, there is no reason not to. Take us back to our ship, and they go back, and then they contact their home base. And before that, they just have discussion. How can it be true? How can they drink and not be drunkards? How can they have crime literature without crime? All this stuff should be producing evils. And then they concoct, well, let's introduce crime and all these evils to their society to give us an excuse to reform it. Oh, yes, that sounds good. What's the plan? Let's contact home base. And here they are said, and by producing these evil end products ourselves. Producing them, you mean causing them to happen? Exactly. If there's no crime, we'll create a few crimes. Let them find a few murders, a few robberies, and you'll see quickly how they look for a scapegoat. Then they trying to contact base and hurry up, report in. This is headquarters, yada yada yada. This is Team 7 reporting in. Here's what we found. Oh, Team 7, been trying to reach you. Stand by. The chief wants to speak with you. The chief himself? The chief? Lucifer himself? Said, here you can see in that image. Oh, it's an antiquated. Yes, image of the devil. There's no use trying to advocate reforms where you are now, you fools. That place you just can't be tormented. I've checked your location. That's heaven. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Now do you see? Yes. As in 53, when they're having the discussions before the hearings, after the time of the Wortham book, Seduction of the Innocent, and comic books specifically, other forms of literature as well, were being blamed for all kinds of ills, particularly juvenile delinquency, which of course, and it was all based primarily on Frederick Wortham's book, which was completely flawed, even though he was an admirable psychiatrist treating underprivileged youth who needed it, but he did not conduct proper not surveys, tests, and his views biased his outcome because he did not conduct proper science. They were blaming something that was blameless, and you've heard it many times since. Blame rock and roll. Blame video games for stuff. It has nothing to do with that. The people who are prone towards that kind of stuff will do it anyway. They might get some ideas from these media or what have you, but it has nothing to do with that. This was a social comment on the times and the blame that comics were receiving at the time, which of course resulted in the Comics Code Authority, which was not necessarily entirely a bad thing, but it was too extreme, and it almost killed the comics industry. So that's one of the reasons why I think it was written by Bill Gaines himself. And thank you for joining me. Please like, share, subscribe if you are a science fiction fan, science fiction fan, classic science fiction fan. Because remember, these titles, they weren't all original stories. They adapted stories by various authors, primarily Ray Bradbury for both science fiction and horror. And it is an important part of the comics medium history and literature itself, because it is, even though it's had for decades been relegated to just poo-poo it as just some throwaway children's thing, it is a legitimate art. Just like literature, just like music, it's a legitimate art. It is just a medium to tell stories, and through media like this, means like this, make social commentary. Thanks for joining me. Please like, share, subscribe, and remember, comics are art.